Hey guys, so I'm excited to share with you today how to start an orchard and how to grow a mini orchard. So depending on how much space you have is going to determine how many fruit trees that you can grow. But don't worry, I've got some different solutions even if you're limited on space, or even if you're not living on your own property yet and you don't really want to plant them in the ground, you can still grow fruit trees in containers. So there's a couple important things that we need to know when we're deciding what type of fruit trees to put in with our growing climate and where we live. Because if you don't pay attention to these things, it can mean the difference between having a lot of fruit or unfortunately not getting any fruit. So if you have fruit trees that are blossoming and blooming, but you're not getting any fruit, it's likely because of these culprits. So the first thing that you have to know when you are deciding to put fruit in is you need to know what your growing zone is. And you can find that on the USDA map for your gardening zones. I'll pop a link in there below. You can punch in your zip code and it'll let you know what your gardening zone is. And the reason that we need to know that is because your gardening zone is an average of the lowest temperatures that you get in the wintertime. And when you're dealing with things like fruit trees or that are perennials, then you have to know what zone they will go down to, what their hardiness zone is. Because, for example, if you live in a gardening zone 3, which is usually pretty cold, you're getting negative temperatures for sure, and you pick a fruit tree variety that is only hardy to say gardening zone 7 or like 10 degrees Fahrenheit, then if you put that tree in, it's not going to survive your cold winter temperatures and you've wasted your money and your time. So that's why we really want to know your gardening zone first. Now, the next thing that you need to know after you have done that is you need to know if that fruit tree requires chill hours. Now, if you have my book, The Family Garden and Plan, and don't worry if you don't, because I'm going to list this all out for you, and I've got some blog posts where you can go and get more information. But we have a complete section on growing fruits and berries. And the reason that I'm saying that is because some fruits require chill hours. So what's a chill hour? Chill hour simply means that you have so many average number of hours during the winter months that the temperature gets 40 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. And the reason this is important is because some fruits like blueberries and some of your fruit trees, if they don't experience those chill hours and those cold number of hours, they won't produce fruit for you in the summer months. They really require those chill hours. The good news is that once you know what your chill hours are, there's quite a few different varieties where you can look at, and some are still in, like there's some blueberries that require a lot less chill hours, so my warmer climate's talking to you, and some that require a lot of chill hours, so like raised here in the Pacific Northwest, then those are the varieties that I'm gonna pick. So fruits that require chill hours. So if you wanna be putting some of these fruits in, you need to make sure you can check also for the average chill hours with your county extension office. You can Google that to figure out if you've not been tracking it, if you meet that. Almonds, apples, apricot, blackberries, blueberries, chestnuts, cherries, currants, fig, filbert, gooseberry, grape, kiwi, mulberry, peach, persimmon, plum, pomegranate, quince, strawberry, raspberry, and walnut all require a certain amount of chill hours. So after we've determined what our chill hours are, then we need to talk about the next reason that a lot of times people do not get fruit off their trees when they have blossoms, and this is cross-pollination. So we don't really run into this a whole lot when we're talking about our annual vegetables and even some of your berries, but it definitely matters with a lot of your fruit trees. Not all fruit trees require, some are self-pollinating. You've got two camps. Self-pollinating fruit, so they'll pollinate themselves, and then others that require pollinators or you're not going to get any fruit. The fruits that require pollination, because I'm going to give a little bit more info on those, are apple, almond, filbert, hazelnut, pear, pistachio, plum, sweet cherry, and walnut. And I'm including the nuts in there. I know people don't always think of them as a fruit, but we're going to include them in there. So when it comes to cross-pollination, you can't just have 2 apple trees. They actually have to be varieties that will cross-pollinate one another. So you don't want to have 2 Honeycrisps because even though they're both apple trees, they're the same variety. They're not going to cross-pollinate. Now with apples, Apples can get a little bit funny because within apples, we have some varieties that will cross-pollinate, and then we have what's called a triploid. And that means that these apple varieties don't actually pollinate the other varieties of apple. And those are in the apple varieties: Baldwin, Blenheim Orange, Bramley, Gravenstein, Red Gravenstein, Crispin, Jonagold, King, Ribston Pippin, and Winesap. Now, if your head is swimming, don't worry. I've got some blog posts where you can go and snag this written information. And when you order from most of your nurseries or go and buy your fruit trees, you can ask them and they'll have listed varieties that will cross-pollinate that, or if it requires a cross-pollinator. So I know I'm naming off a lot of things, but don't let that overwhelm you. But the reason that this is important is when you're picking out your varieties that cross-pollinate, one, they have to be varieties that will cross-pollinate one another. And then not only do we want to pick the varieties that will cross-pollinate one another, but we need to pay a little bit of attention to bloom time. So you have some cherry trees that will bloom really early, some that will bloom a little bit later, same thing with your apple trees. But here is a phenomenal tip for your apple trees. If you get a crab apple, specifically a white flowering crab apple, it will pollinate almost every other kind of apple tree. And the great thing about a crab apple is it actually has a unique way that it blooms on two different pieces of the wood. So you'll have early blooms, mid blooms, and even late blooms, because obviously if you've got two varieties of a tree and they're blooming at two different times, one blooms really early and one blooms late, their bloom times aren't going to cross over and then they can't pollinate one another. So for apple trees, a crab apple is an excellent way to go. Plus, crab apples are really high in pectin, so you have a pectin source for making your homemade jams and jellies. So here on the crab apple, you'll see this is the older wood. So we've got these fruit blossoms, and these are going to bloom first. So this is going to be our early bloom pollinator. And then you come up here to the new growth, and right here is a blossom bud, and this will break later in the season to catch those mid and end of year blooms. So after determining your chill hours in your gardening zone, so then you know exactly which types of trees you're going to be able to grow successfully, then we get to picking our varieties with our cross-pollination if they need it or not. But here's a great tip. If you're limited on space, you're going to want to get some dwarf or semi-dwarf varieties. So all of my fruit trees here behind me, those are all semi-dwarf varieties. Semi-dwarf are great because they're not going to get as big and sprawling as our standard trees, which can get up to, they can be huge, like 20, 30 plus feet. But you're still going to get a really good crop off of them, and you can keep them pruned to a little bit smaller to fit into those tight spaces. So look for dwarf or semi-dwarf trees. The other thing that you can do is you can pick self-pollinating fruits. So if you're like, I only have spot for maybe one fruit tree, then you're gonna pick a self-pollinating fruit. So it may be an apricot, a pear, a sour cherry, European plum, or peach, because you won't need that pollinator and you won't need space for two trees. The other thing that you can get, I'm trying to see here, I've had my trees in for a while. Let's go a little bit backwards. You can get what they call a cocktail tree, like a fruit cocktail tree. And what they've done is on the rootstock, but there's other solutions as well. So one of the things that you can do is get a fruit cocktail tree. So you'll find these at nurseries. You can order them online or in person. And they've taken a rootstock and they graft several different varieties onto the same tree. So you've got varieties that will cross-pollinate one another all on one tree. And so this apple tree right here happens to be one of those. This tree is like, oh my goodness, I think it's close to 12 years old since we've had it in here. The only, I don't know if downfall is really the right word that I'm looking for, but when you are doing a grafted like this, and it's that fruit cocktail where you've got different branches, if something damages one of the branches, then that whole variety is wiped out. And that one branch is only ever going to grow that same variety. So it means you're gonna be limited, like I'm limited on this bottom big branch here. I'm limited on that branch because it's been grafted in. It's the trunk, the rootstock itself is not going to produce more of that apple. So I'm limited to what I can get on that specific variety. But as the tree continues to grow and its main rootstock, it will continue to put up other branches. As you can see, it's went up. When we first got this, it only had four branches, 4 varieties that were on here, and I've got a lot more than 4 branches now. So as it grows, I'll just get more of whatever that rootstock variety is. So check out what the rootstock is to make sure it's an apple that you're going to want to have a lot of. But you can get them in all kinds of the cherries, plums, apples are common that I see this on. So that can be one solution. It helps with your pollinators and getting fruit in off of one tree. That's another way to go if you only have room for one tree and you do want to put in that fruit that does require cross-pollination. You want to make sure that your fruit trees are in full sun. They're going to require full sun in the summertime to produce and to get ripe. So you definitely want to make sure, you can see I've got my whole line here, even though we're in early spring here, they are in full sun. And for those varieties that require cross-pollination, ideally you want them to be within 50 to 60 feet of one another so that they're getting the full benefit and they're actually cross-pollinating one another. Also make sure that when you plant them, remember they're going to be growing, that you've got enough space between the trees. So I have close to 20 feet between these trees, and then I can keep them pruned if I need to, but so that they've got enough space as they begin to branch out and to get bigger, that you're not crowding them too much. The first year that you plant your fruit trees, you need to make sure that you keep watering them, especially through the summer months. So if you're not getting an inch of rain per week, then you probably need to be watering your plants. So keeping them near an area where you can either stretch a hose or you're not packing water too far can really be an important thing during that first summer. Oftentimes people will plant them in late winter, early spring when we're putting in our bare root plants. And then August comes around and they figure the plant's established and they stop watering it. And a lot of people will lose new trees by not watering them weekly during those hot summer months and into the fall months. Now, another important thing to keep in mind with your fruit trees is it can take several years, sometimes up to 7 years, before you actually get a fruit harvest. So the sooner you can put them in, the better, because it may be quite a while before you get your fruit trees. But this can be great if you're not on your forever homestead and you want to get a jump start, is you can pick the compact dwarf varieties and you can plant them in a large planter knowing that you really won't be getting a fruit harvest on them for several years anyways. And then you'll be moving and hopefully being able to put them into the ground. Now, some of your dwarf and semi-dwarf varieties will begin to fruit closer to years 4 and 5, but most of the time it's years 6 and 7 before you really get a really large fruit harvest if you're starting with just a 1-year-old stock to begin with. And even though I put my fruit trees in because I actually wanted to get fruit off of them and harvest them, I have to say that they are one of my favorite parts of gardening. I love to come out, especially in the springtime when they're blossoming. They're just beautiful to have in the landscape. And I just kind of like to walk and check on them and meander and just enjoy them. So even though we're planting them for fruit, they will bring a lot of enjoyment. So remember, for more resources on starting an orchard, using organic methods with your fruit trees, pruning, all of those type of things, I've got a ton of resources listed for you beneath this video. So just click the see more and you'll see all of those different links, including where to go to get some of this chart information for cross-pollination and chill hours. Thank you so much, guys.